Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Daniel Rosen, a jazz guitarist and singer in the Gentlemen's Anti-Temperance League. We talk about how he got his start in music, growing up on a northern Minnesota farm, and his short story writing on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Daniel Rosen, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You are a musician, a writer, just sort of artist in the big picture sense of artist.
I think that's a good way. My parents used to jokingly describe me to their friends as a multimedia artist.
That feels like that covers a lot of ground that way.
It does. Yeah. It's quick.
I don't like using the word creative. Like you're a creative. I suppose you are, but I feel like that's not quite descriptive enough.
Sure. I guess where I would come in for that sort of thing is I just don't mind at all. I just do the stuff
right.
I do and we can call it whatever.
All right. Fair enough. So musician, among your projects is one of the great band names I have heard of. It is the Gentlemen's Anti-Temperance League. How did you and this quartet come together to play it's fantastic jazz, but it's sort of feels like old school, like almost like 1930s, 40s kind of jazz.
Yeah. It's kind of a complicated and meandering story to get there in total.
Okay.
It started out for me when I was young. I went to a French immersion language camp, Concordia Language Villages.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me into the project. I would do a project every year. And my project would be to write a song in French. And as I started writing songs in French, I started listening to more songs in French, and I started listening to more French music. And it got me eventually into jazz manouche and like Django Reinhardt. And this whole it's its own branch of it's a blend of jazz music and traditional like European music and folk music and so many other things that get pulled in too. And so from there, I'd been interested in that for a long time. And then I just got together with a friend and was like, we should learn to do this. This is a challenging type of music and we should learn how to do it. And my friend is willing to go along with most harebrained schemes.
Everybody needs a friend like that.
Yeah. So we did it. We started learning tunes, one at a time. And then we took them on a little fun busking tour across, from Minnesota out to the West Coast around, I think we started in Portland and then just went down the coast to San Francisco and then came back, had some headstocks broken off by the desert heat, had some fun adventures with, some interesting people along the way. And and then we came back and decided, hey, this went really well. We love what we're doing. It's such a joy to be playing music like this. Let's start a band. And we did. It ended up being less traditional and more about like writing modern songs and expressing where we're at right now. But I think that is true to the spirit of music in general to me. So
for sure. Is it weird? Weird isn't the right word, but I guess difficult trying to write modern songs, but in this almost style that's coming up on like a century old.
Oh, so I don't think it's difficult at all.
Okay.
But I think other people I've definitely encountered a lot of difficulty with people in sort of, I think where it sits in their brain, where people are like, oh, you play this traditional style of like jazz, like pre-war jazz, 30s, 40s, right around there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I don't really, because that would entail that I'm playing like from this set of 50 standards and I'm learning and transcribing these songs from like famous performances, famous solos, things like that. I'm not really doing that. I'm just writing new tunes that are like in the style of music that I listen to.
So that was where you picked up music, was your harebrained idea of, hey, let's learn how to do this.
Well, when I was even younger, I decided to be like, I got into music, doing like like rock music,
Okay.
get in the garage with a bunch of people and a bunch of guitar pedals and make a bunch of noisy stuff. Um, but that was the start of it. And then I really deeply got more into it with this. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a pretty big shift from, classic garage, like the way that so many great bands started was just screwing around in the garage with a lot of guitar pedals and making noise, to what you're doing now, which is a far more nuanced type of sound.
Yeah. I guess the linking factor is that when I left my small town and came to Minneapolis for school, and I wanted to keep playing music. So I was playing songs that I was writing like as a solo artist. So it'd just be me and an acoustic guitar, because that was what you do. That's what people do. Like it's what I knew that people did. And I was starting to get very frustrated because it's nuance. There was no nuance to the chords or the arrangement in the music that I was writing. And I felt like there was, like when I heard it in my head, there was more to it. And so I sort of used the style and the body of work to add to my toolbox of guitar chords initially. And I just learned a whole bunch of like jazzy guitar chords. And then as that time goes on, you start to learn that, these different chords have these different flavors, and there's different melodies and harmonies that blend into these chords and from one chord to another. And you just sort of build yourself into this like big, historic body of work, I guess.
And then adding 3 other pieces to the band, once you got to the point you're at now, elevates both the level of what you can do and the nuance to the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And the instrumentation makes sense because a lot of time there is history and there's reason for it. So like in Jazz Manouche, for example, most music has like a bass. They're like, yeah, we want that bass element in it. But specifically having like multiple guitars is the things you can trade off who's playing rhythm and who's playing melody. So there's always support for any melody that is happening, things like that. But it definitely was a really important thing. I still play solo gigs, but the real joy to me comes in sharing. I guess I think of it as a shared monologue. We're all delivering sort of a monologue. I know a lot of people talk about it like a dialogue, but the reality of the situation is like we're playing the music we're going to play, and it's the dialogue might be emotional between whoever's listening, but
the music is one way. It's from the stage to the audience, but the shared experience is what is the dialogue piece.
Yes, well put.
Oh, thank you. Did you come to the U to were you like a music major of some sort? Was that what you wanted to study when you moved down here?
Absolutely not. Nope.
Oh, okay.
I got my degree in anthropology, specifically linguistic anthropology. So it really is completely unrelated. I could stretch and say that there's some link because by studying like human behavior through time, that somehow that ties into music. And in fact, the more I say that, the more I'm like, yeah, I actually really do feel that way.
You really convinced yourself there, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm very good at convincing myself of things. But yeah, it really had no intention to be pursuing music as a career whatsoever. And then I became a translator right out of school. I was translating like market research surveys in French, which was frankly awful. It was really not pleasant.
It sounds kind of miserable. I'm not gonna lie.
It was not good. And then I was like, all right, I'm done with this. I'm just gonna do music more and grind and hustle and try to make it happen.
That's the part that I think a lot of people who have been involved in music, I think they sort of understand that. But a lot of times at a certain point, you got to make money, right? So at some point, if it doesn't click, it can still sort of be the hobby or the sideline, but you got to go, be a grown up.
Right.
as they say, and support yourself on
Yeah.
something if the music isn't coming. So what makes the hustle worth it for you?
That's a great question. And it's a very interesting question post-pandemic, because I think my answer has changed drastically.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the hustle that made it worth it was that I loved playing music with other people that I loved on stage. I loved sharing that experience. With the secondary addition of specifically for touring, I love getting out of the bubble and going to different towns, different cities, different communities, different states, different countries. I love traveling around and seeing how people feel about things. And sometimes there's some weird friction, and you're like, oh, okay, you feel very differently than what I'm used to, which I think is
Sure.
really healthy and important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things, especially with the internet now. It's so easy for us to be in our own little world and not really be aware of all the different bubbles that people have going on, culturally. But what makes it worth it, I mean, is the ability to just do that, is the ability to do the thing you love on the regular, every day, every night. There are parts of it that realistically are not pleasant for most people. I don't think most people, when they decide they're going to become a musician and fall in love with music, are like, cool, what I really want to do is spend 8 hours answering booking emails and setting up logistics for a tour and booking lodging and negotiating rates and contracts. But everything else is really great. So, it makes it worth it to be able to do that.
All well in the back of a van or something.
Hey, and I love, everybody's different. I think I'm the only one in any band I've ever played with who just loves sitting in a van, laying in the back of the van. I've done some of the best writing and thinking in my life, and I think a lot of people can probably identify with that, with like a road trip.
Mm-hmm.
When you're just there and you're like, I'm going to be here in this space for 4 to 6 hours, and your mind is like free to think about things because there's nothing else to do. Nothing can get in there and change your situation in that moment.
And I would think that sort of the ability to tour and be, especially outside, like if you go internationally and tour and sort of see other people and get out of your bubble here to see other people's bubble, I would think, having never written a song in my life, I would think that gives you some opportunity to find some inspiration in writing about the experiences elsewhere.
Absolutely. I would say almost all of my creative works, whether they're stories, short stories, novels, songs, they stem from this same idea of encountering someone else's viewpoint, usually something that I feel is harmful or bad for the person, which is, maybe judgy and not a good way to go about it, but it's exploring that really is the seed for a lot of creative work that I do, is like, why does someone feel this way and what does it do for them? And just trying to explore, I don't know, trying to at least squeeze one shoe of somebody else's onto my foot and see how it feels.
What was it like growing up in northern Minnesota? You grew up on a small organic farm just west of Duluth. What was it like sort of growing up there and figuring out this path that you're on now?
It was pretty idyllic. I think looking back now, when I was younger, I hated it because it was an insane amount of hard manual labor and work. Like I had to get up every day before school at like, I don't know, 5:30, 6 in the morning, and bring out hay bales for the sheep and feed the chickens and collect eggs and clean up the hay from the feeder for the sheep after I was done doing the eggs, and chopping wood, because the house was heated by wood. Basically, a lot of probably stereotypical things you might think of someone living on like an old farm.
Okay.
And I think when you lead a lifestyle like that, it encourages a lot of lateral thinking about the world around you, because when a problem arises, no one is going to be able to come and solve it for you. If something breaks, if the hay feeder breaks, you can't be like, cool, well, we'll just order a new hay feeder on Amazon. It's like, okay, I'm going to need to get some 2x4s and nail together a fix for this right now because it needs to get done. And I'm the only one who's going to be able to do it. And I think that mindset at the very least transfers out into the world too. You know, it's the sort of thing that offers the independence to make a decision about like, I'm going to become this. The decision, how would I say that? It gives you the agency to make decisions about your life and follow through on them because you're used to doing it.
No, I think it's interesting lessons that are very applicable. Even, I mean, you may not have thought they'd be applicable, you know, back when you were getting up at 6 a.m. to feed the sheep, but
yeah, I certainly didn't.
No, it's I would definitely think it's hard to see the bigger picture at that moment.
Yeah.
That's for sure. You know, one of the things, you know, we were talking about your writing when I had first reached out to you. You had written a short story, a sci-fi short story about wrestling with your Jewish faith, which you didn't grow up like super steeped. I would say, if you'll excuse me being judgy about that in a Jewish home. Not that I care, because everybody grows up how they grow up. That's fine. But what led you to write about something like that as an adult when it's not something you were necessarily as brought up in, shall we say?
Yeah. When I was young, it wasn't something I thought about much, you know, like the parts of my life that were Jewish faith and heritage, you know, like going to temple once in a while, going to friends' bar and bat mitzvahs, celebrating Hanukkah and Passover, things that we did. I didn't think about it. It's like you don't think about your hand. It was just kind of, you know, part of my life that It was only later that I realized like not all of my friends did all those things. And I was like, oh, not everyone's doing that. Okay, right. And so once I had that realization is when I first started to sort of like wrestle with this idea of like, you know, what is this heritage to me and where do I stand within it and where does that fit me into like the greater world? And it really came out a lot stronger. That story as an example and other parts of my life where I've been wrestling with this started coming up, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I think was the first time I'd ever like experienced anti-Semitism like directly in my face towards myself, which again, it was one of those things I hadn't thought about much before until, you know, traveling around, I would get like some slurs and I got kicked out of a bar in Seattle, weirdly enough, because my last name was Rosen, which was really unpleasant. That was a crazy experience that day. But that really started to make me think about it, where I realized that even if it wasn't something that I was thinking about most of the year or conscious of, a lot of other people were thinking about it, and it was kind of out of my control. And so it felt like it behooved me to start thinking about like where I fit and what that meant to me, I guess.
And since that experience, which is awful, obviously, it sort of goes without saying there, how have you thought about it differently? What does that sort of mindset shift look like?
Right. Well, it's been a number of things. One is this lingering desire to keep exploring. I feel like I want to do more to figure out what it means to me and make it into something that's my own choice. And also recognizing parts of myself that, you know, that come from my dad and maybe come from a wider community in general, different aspects of myself, just recognizing some patterns and where some of those things come from.
And obviously, I mean, I can't imagine there was a big Jewish community where you grew up.
No. Well, the Temple Israel in Duluth is, I mean, it's not huge. No, there just isn't. Although I had like most of my friends, I guess, were at Temple Israel when I was growing up, which I didn't think twice about. So to me, it seems like thinking back, I'm like, oh no, like it was a big community. There's like lots of people.
Well, I guess, you know, being about 45 minutes or so from Duluth, that's not terrible. That's not a terrible drive.
And I hadn't even mentioned, but in high school, I would commute all the way to Duluth. I'm sure in Minnesota they have open enrollment, and I went all the way to Duluth for school because I wanted to learn math and a foreign language.
So you were in Duluth Public Schools then, rather than whatever school district you would have been.
Yeah. I was at Barnum in the, I can't even remember like the ISD number for the school district, but Barnum Elementary and Barnum High School. And it was good, but I wanted to learn French. I wanted to learn calculus. I wanted to like learn things that I felt were just like fundamental.
Yeah.
I just wanted a little more.
No, I get it. I get that. So your interest in French then, it started at those language camps then?
It did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there like a familial connection to French beforehand, or was just what you wanted to learn when you went to Concordia?
I didn't even want to learn French.
What did you want to learn there then?
I didn't want to learn anything, but my I think to get me out away from the farm for a summer, my grandmother was like, "You're going to go to this language camp." And my parents were like, "Yeah, that sounds great. He should do that." And I was like, "I don't want to go to this language camp. What do you, this sounds super lame. I do not want to do this. I don't want to be the kid that went to language camp over the summer. What's that going to do to me?" But I went, and it completely changed my life, in part because of the language, but also in part because I met people from all across the United States for really the first time, with a lot of different ideas and viewpoints and interests and cultural backgrounds. And I loved it.
And that camp, in a way, really helped open the door to what you're doing now musically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I 100% would not be doing what I'm doing right now if it were not for that.
So we talked about the short story you did. What other types of writing do you do, and how, do you publish regularly? Where can people find your work?
Yeah. Well, you can find it at danielpatrickrosen.com. You can find links to all the short stories I've published in a variety of magazines and journals and stuff. Around the same time I started doing music, I had the idea that I would be writing short stories as an additional like income source. That was a terrible idea because there is not a lot of money in music, and there's even less in writing short fiction. But I was very hungry for it for a long time. And so I had a rigorous like schedule. Like I would get up in the morning and I would write, and I would take a break to practice music, and then I would write more. And I had like a publication schedule. I was like, you need to be putting these stories out for publication. Like every story should always be out for publication until it's accepted. And I did that for 5 or 6 years, I think. And then after I had published, I don't know, 20 stories or something, I realized that like I wasn't even sure, like I still liked writing, and the writing was really important to me, but I wasn't sure what the point of like grind was. It didn't have that same fulfillment that playing music did. So now, I send a story out for publication once in a while if I feel like it. I still write, but now I just kind of let stories sit a lot of the time, unless every once in a while from someone I've worked with in the past, I'll get a request and someone will say, "Hey, I'm putting together this anthology. Has these themes. I was wondering if you have like a story that might fit it."
So with the music, where do you mostly play with the band? You mentioned you do some solo stuff, you do some band stuff. What's most common these days, especially as we think we're coming out of a pandemic, but right. Who really knows?
Band stuff for sure. The solo stuff, if I'm being 100% honest, the solo stuff is primarily a way to augment income. And also it's a good way to explore new songs, songs that have been recently written that we haven't had time yet for the band to practice and arrange, but I'm chomping at the bit and I'm like, I want to see how this feels to play it. I want to see how people feel about it when I do it. So it's a great opportunity to do that as well, but it's mostly band performances is where I lie.
It's like how comedians will go test out material at like the small club before they do the stadium show.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. I think it's very similar to that. And you inevitably I learn about the song, doing that a little bit, and it offers some insight when it does come time to bring it up for everyone and we're arranging it and talking about how we want to perform it together. It offers insight to have a little road testing for it, I think.
Your real-time feedback.
Yes.
Which is definitely, you could play it for, your friends or family, but as much as it's nice to get the adulation,
right,
it's not always going to be the most honest feedback.
That's my least favorite type of feedback is the like, that's something, especially with, I really learned to develop thick skin for fiction critiquing. I was part of a number of critique workshops for years. I still am, actually. And a standard part of that is like you get together with a group of people and you rip apart each other's stories. You rip it up. You're like, this is bad. This is bad. Usually you're more constructive than that, but you basically have to deal with that. And so learning that, it's sort of sometimes difficult for me to come back to the part where you like play something or show something to a friend and they're like, oh, I love it. And you're like, okay, do you feel any other way about it? Do you have any mechanical thoughts on it? Or okay, all right.
Yeah.
I can't do anything with I love it. Like
Right. That's not, it's nice, but it's not like useful feedback.
Right.
It's not feedback that can improve it.
Right, exactly.
It's good to hear.
Right.
but then what?
Right.
Well, excellent. Well, where can people find out about where you're playing, when you're playing, where they can go see you around the metro area or anywhere else where you might be on the road to at some point?
The best place is at thegatl.band or .com. I think the URL resolves either way. But it's just thegatl.com, and we've got a website, and you can go check out our calendar and see where we're going to be going. We do a pretty good job of keeping it updated. It got a little worse over the pandemic because I hadn't had to update it for like months, so I'm kind of out of the habit. But we go back in and update it on the semi-regular.
Well, excellent. Well, hopefully we will. There will be shows that people can come see you guys at very soon.
Yeah.
And we'll have a link to that and your personal website in the show notes.
Oh, awesome.
Before we let you go, the last two questions we always end on. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Ooh, it's Hanukkah. I love lighting the candles, and having the. There's something about the ritual of like going through each day, and it's like, I don't know, getting together in sort of like a stillness just before that I really like. I don't know.
No, that's great. That's awesome. And what is your favorite Jewish food?
So I don't actually know if this counts, but we had this like fish wrapped in paper all the time. At Temple, it was like you wrap it in parchment paper and it's got some like oil and lemon inside of it. You tie it with a string and then you bake. It probably doesn't count. It's probably not like a traditional thing, but it's from my childhood. It's like something that I think of as like a,
If you had it at Temple, I think any food you have at Temple could be construed a Jewish food.
Yeah. It was like flaky and good. And yeah.
No, I think we can count that. That's fine.
Okay.
Anything from the more recent vintage that might be?
We had some killer like sufganio, like fried things covered in sugar, and it was so good. Just this last winter. So,
listen, good fried. Anything fried, like we do fried pretty good.
Yeah.
Especially Hanukkah. Like
the
latkes, the sufganiyah, those totally work.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel Rosen, it has been a pleasure to get to talk to you. Again, check out the show notes for the links to everything, and hopefully we will see you in the band out playing in the Twin Cities very soon. Thank you for joining me.
Cool. Thank you, Lonnie.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.